Welcome, everyone. My name's Megan Anderson, and I'd like to very warmly welcome you on behalf of Country Navigator to this session on culturally intelligent psychological safety. I'd love to begin by having you all just click on the chat icon and enter in where are you joining the session from. It's always really exciting for me to see how many of you we have and how many diverse countries are in our session today. So we've got India, we've got Denmark, Canada, Malta, Italy. I'm joining from Edinburgh in Scotland. Very excited today because we've had a bit of sunshine. Finally, summer has arrived. And I'm really looking forward to being with you in this session. And I can already see from the chat what an amazing variety of different cultures we have with us. So, without further ado, I'm going to jump straight into our slides and introduce you to the session. So in this masterclass, we're going to be looking at why we need psychological safety. So keeping in mind throughout the next hour that we have together, why this topic is so important, and particularly in the context that we find ourselves in today. We're going to also take a really practical look at how do we create psychological safety. And also keep in mind throughout the session, some of the biggest challenges we face in creating psychological safety are this work environment that we find ourselves in and have done for the last few years. How do we create psychological safety in hybrid working? And in virtual working, where so often we are not co-located with our teammates. So what I'd like to begin with is a quick mural activity. And in this mural activity, we're going to spend just a few minutes asking ourselves the question, how do we know when we have psychological safety at work? And I'm sure most of you will be familiar with Mural. What you just simply do is click on the link that you find in the chat, and this will open up a mural board for you. And what you do is you just double click on one of the little post-it notes and enter your thoughts. The question being, how do you know when you have psychological safety at work? It's a term that we're probably familiar with, but what does it actually look and feel like when we have it? So just spend some time thinking about what is our evidence for that? What is our evidence? That could be what we see, what we hear, often what we feel. And we've got some great comments coming in already. I don't have to think about trust. Being able to trust. That word's coming up already as a theme. Free to speak. There's less covering. People show up as their true selves. I feel free to make a mistake. There's an absence of worry. No stress factor in meetings. So often, stress is the result of not feeling psychologically safe. Honest feedback. And I'm imagining that that's both giving and receiving. You can sign into Mural or create an account, or I think you can just log in as a guest as well, Renata. Thank you for your question, because I'm sure you're not the only one with that. Ability to speak freely. So there's a lot of themes emerging here. The words freedom, myself, absence of fear, honesty, being heard, trust, transparency. That's another great one. There's a sense of transparency, openness, best work from all. That's a really important one in terms of an outcome of psychological safety. We can give our best work. We can see others giving their best work. We're free to do that. And we feel open to share our ideas. So that real sense of collaboration and a sense of well-being. I like the little graphic of the bird with that comment. Able to grow and learn from others. When there's an absence of fear, we're often much more able to grow and learn from others and receiving constructive feedback. We get to know each other. We can challenge respectfully. And that's a really important one. We're able to challenge, and it's done in a way that's respectful. I don't have negative thoughts about myself. Yeah, that internal dialogue that so often plagues us, if it's negative, can be positive. And the word transparency is also appearing multiple times as well. No stupid questions. I'm free to ask questions, ability to make mistakes. So we can see some really clear examples of how do we know that we have the presence of psychological safety. So really great comments. Thank you so much for sharing those. So as we dive a little bit deeper into this topic, let's have a look at what we truly mean by psychological safety and what is present when it exists and the consequences of when psychological safety is not present. So, psychological safety, and many, in fact, all of these comments you've mentioned, comfort admitting mistakes, learning from failure, huge business benefit to better innovation and decision making, and everyone openly able to share ideas. So let's have a quick look now at what does it mean when we are not experiencing psychological safety? In other words, psychological danger. And here are the symptoms really of an environment where psychological safety is not present. Often the presence of blaming others. So when we see a lot of finger pointing in a team or in a culture or in an organization, often that's the result of people not feeling safe, people being driven by fear and looking for ways to protect themselves, fear of making mistakes, fear of admitting to having made a mistake, the common knowledge effect, that sense of don't approach that person, don't bring up this particular topic, that shared knowledge that is often unspoken in an organization can be an indicator of psychological danger. And we see that people are much less likely to share different views, to challenge and have a controversial opinion. People tend to keep those to themselves. So we can see that the benefits of having a psychologically safe environment are that there's more inclusion, more collaboration, greater trust, well being, management of stress, and so on. Psychological safety does not also always just imply comfort. So, in a psychologically safe environment, we're free to disagree, we're free to challenge, and that does not create conflict because of that sense of trust that we have and that we feel safe doing so. So the result often is a much more robust result when we're able to have every voice contribute and feel free to do so. So let's think for a moment about you in your own contexts. How psychologically safe do you personally feel in your own team context right now? And so we're going to bring up an anonymous poll where you'll get a range of answers to choose from, all the way from not at all psychologically safe, not very neutral, not sure how safe I feel, or that could be variable safety. Perhaps some days you feel safer than others. Quite. So fairly, there's a degree of safety and very. And I'll just give you a few moments to really be honest and reach inside and think, how safe do I currently feel? All the way from not at all to very. I see lots of people are pondering that and answers coming in. How safe do you currently feel? If we've now looked at the definitions and what are the indicators of the presence of psychological safety versus not, where do you sit on that? And let's go ahead and share those results. So we can see, and we've got a raised hand there. So do go ahead and share your question in the chat, just so that I can make sure I get to answer that. I'm just going to stop sharing for a moment. So we've got our results in there. And if you do have a question, do just pop that into chat. So what we've seen from the group is we've got about 5% on the not at all end, ranging all the way through to 21% on the very, with the majority of people falling in the quite. So what that tells us is that there's definitely room for improvement. And that is exactly what we're going to be looking at here. So thank you for sharing that. Second poll coming up, and I'm sure you'll have ideas about this, is what is the key issue that would improve psychological safety in your team? So think about your own team. Think about what influenced your previous answer. What do you think would make the biggest difference? What would be the biggest benefit? Greater transparency, better communication, understanding each other, or respect for others' opinions and perspectives? And it might be quite tricky to pick between these, but which one for you would make the biggest difference? And I'll just give you a few moments to ponder that. Think about what prompted your previous response, the reasons for that, and what might significantly improve things. Almost got everyone. Almost got everyone entering. And we've got some comments in the chat as well. For bigger companies, definitely depends on the department and the line managers you're working with. Absolutely, Andreas. I think there are a lot of variables, which is probably why people put quite as as an answer. Last time we had a big percentage of you saying quite, is that it can be very variable depending on the department and depending on the manager. And that's an excellent point. And do feel free throughout the session to enter comments into the chat as well. Really, really helpful. So let's go ahead and share those results now and have a look at what came up here. So what we can see this time is we've got quite evenly spread results actually between those four possibilities for improvement. The one that's coming out the highest is respect for other opinions and perspectives. And that's actually one of the key topics that we're going to be looking into today is how do we increase that sense that the respect is present? How do we do that in a really practical way? So thank you for checking in with us around that. And let's continue on. So we've looked at the differences between the presence of psychological safety and when it's not present. We've looked at how psychologically safe you all feel or not. And we've looked at what are some of the biggest differences that we could implement to increase psychological safety. What we're going to look at next is a really interesting model that looks at the stages of development in organizations of psychological safety. And we're going to be exploring this in terms of two different dimensions. The first dimension is described as respect. And respect really refers to the degree to which employee or team members are respected. And the horizontal axis looks at permission. How much permission or autonomy do people feel they have in order to go off and take action? How much ownership and accountability and permission are people given? And across these two dimensions, we've got a number of different stages. And as I describe each of these stages, I'd like you to think about where your team might be at. What stage of development might your team be at in terms of psychological safety? So, the first one we'll talk about is exclusion. And this is a state that exists where there's low respect for people and their opinions and their contributions and inputs, and also low permission for people to actually go off and do what they need to do in their roles. The next phase that we could look at is inclusion safety. So, slightly up the scale on both respect and permission, of where people feel part of a team. So, they're part of the team identity, and a person is actively included, and the group accepts that there is a relationship with that person. So, they feel part of the team. The next stage up, going higher and higher up in respect and permission, is what we call learner psychological safety. And in learner psychological safety, the person is given support in their learning and their place in the team, information about new processes, and opportunities to learn. And that's the level of safety that they are then enjoying. The next level up, we talk about contributor safety. So, at this stage of psychological safety, the person is able to activate their learning and given permission to contribute fully in the team. So, the person would be sharing their ideas, sharing their thoughts, and really feeling safe enough to contribute and add value. And the final stage is where we have the highest levels of respect and permission. And this is called challenger psychological safety. At this stage, the person is accepted into the team to the level that they are encouraged to actually challenge the status quo. And, for example, propose a new process, perhaps come with a view that's very different from the rest of the team, and challenge both upwards and sideways to peers as well as downwards. And that's where we really reach the pinnacle in these phases. Now, it's nice and neatly presented in a linear format here. But of course, at any time, we might regress in psychological safety, or in that sense of psychological safety, based on the context and based on the experience. So, someone might feel at a challenger level of psychological safety until they do that, and there's a really negative response, which might cause them then to regress backwards down the stages. So it's constantly a work in progress because, of course, a team can achieve a certain status, but will only remain at that state if they continue to contribute to that level of safety. So what I'd like to do next is have you really think about and type into the chat, where do you think your team is currently at with regards these different stages of safety? If you have to think really honestly about your team, where do you think your teams might be? What stage might they be at? And that could be directly related to the score that you recently gave. So we've got all the way from people feeling excluded, so really very low levels of inclusion, to people feel part of something. They feel they identify with the team identifies with them. People feel safe to learn and ask questions, even if they might come across as an ignorant question. They feel safe to do that and learn and are provided with those opportunities, all the way to contributing and adding value. And then challenger safety, which is coming with a very different opinion. And we see a whole range of different ones, all the way from between learner and contributor. We've got challenger, contributor, between contributor and challenger safety. Most of the companies add inclusion. And again, we've got some examples of where teams might be different from the overall company or organizational sense of psychological safety. And that's going to be contributed to by a number of different factors. Another interesting one, within my peers contribute to safety, but with some directors no higher than learners. So that's another really interesting point, is that with different stakeholder groups, we might answer this question really differently. A very different experience within your team versus other teams in the organizations that you're in, or upwards as well. So fascinating concepts there. Really, really interesting. So thank you for sharing those. So what we're going to do next is we're actually going to look at a little case study. Oh, one more point before we move on. The paternalism label there is related to where an organization shows high respect for others, but gives very little permission. In other words, micromanages as a style. So I respect my teammates, but I'm not giving them autonomy to go forward and take accountability. And then the situation where we have high permission but low respect is termed exploitation. So this is a state that exists in organizations where people are tapped for maximum value, but are not respected in terms of their opinions. So we see that those two opposite ends of the spectrum there. So let's have a look now at how this might pan out in a case study. So I'm going to give you a chance to read through the case study, and then we're going to answer a poll question about this. So Georgi was excited when he started his new role in a civil engineering firm. The induction was thorough, and his manager, Savina, made sure he was familiar with the key processes and tools he needed. She also introduced him to the team. But that's where the problem started. Georgi's role was to bring new ideas to the project, but his teammates just weren't interested in listening to him. Even Savina was pretty passive. She didn't really support him or give any signs of encouragement. Emilia, one of the more friendly team members, mentioned to Georgi that Savina liked to be the source of new ideas, and the rest of them had learned not to bother offering them. Georgi had by then already decided to look for a different job. So there we have a situation. And what I'm going to ask you to do next is answer the poll questions. At which stage of psychological safety is this team? What level, from the levels that we've just described, what level do we think? So we've got inclusion, learner, contributor, and challenger. So he's been brought in for his ideas, but it's not going in the way that he would have expected or hoped. And I'll just give you a few moments to enter that. And we've got some comments in the chat as well. They are stuck at inclusion safety. So let's go ahead and share those results. So we got the majority of you talking about inclusion. Yeah, so he's been brought in. He's been welcomed. They're friendly team members. He's definitely relating to being part of the team. He's obviously in a learning curve. He's contributed, but his contributions have been rejected. And it doesn't sound, actually, even if they are particularly challenging contributions. So he's definitely in one of those really early stages where he's part of the team, but the permission to actually share the sense of comfort around doing that is definitely compromised. And we see, of course, the impact of that on him, which is he's already decided to look for another job. So thank you for sharing those. What we're going to look at next is a model that really helps us to think about how we implement this and how we help our teams move up that ladder in terms of psychological safety. And this is called the CARE model. And the first step of creating psychological safety is actually wanting to do it, is recognizing the value that can be achieved through psychological safety. And in our example, Savina, the manager, just doesn't seem to want to create psychological safety. She's very comfortable keeping the team exactly where they are, regardless of the consequences. And it may be actually that someone higher up than her needs to intervene. So much of this is created, that sense of psychological safety is created and driven from the leadership, who will have a profound effect on how psychologically safe the team actually feels. And as we've already said, we need to constantly work on psychological safety to avoid erosion. The CARE model relies on cultural intelligence. And this is really where the importance of cultural intelligence comes in. We need to understand our own styles and needs as well as those of others. And this is where a tool like Country Navigator can be so incredibly useful. And if you have access to Country Navigator, you can use the Teams toolkit to look at the cultural profiles of your team, because we all have different preferences, and these are driven by those cultural characteristics. If you don't have access to Country Navigator, do email us afterwards and we can set up a trial account for you. And then you're able to see what levels of risk the team is comfortable with regards psychological safety, or how people approach problems, or what their expectations are from their manager and each other. Let's go through each of these in turn and have a look at the impact. In terms of communication, we need to understand how others communicate and how, for example, they show concern. How do they show disagreement? And recognize characteristics like the explicit and implicit ways they show that they are empowered to speak truth to power. And we need to reaffirm verbally and non verbally that disagreement is acceptable and welcomed. Not everyone will just know that this is the case, even if it's a hard message to accept. And often it's the communication after a disagreement that reaffirms this. Authenticity. For true psychological safety, we need to be able to express our values and beliefs through our work without fear of judgment, or that it will impede our careers and damage our careers. Although our private and personal lives are separated, we have the freedom to choose how much or how little we reveal about our personal lives at work. The choice is ours. And similarly, psychological safety relies on seeing that the culture of safety aligns with people's real values, that it's not performative, but genuine. And that means we must work hard to reinforce it continually, as well as owning up when we get it wrong. Respect is more than just acceptance or tolerance. And the word respect was mentioned a few times at the beginning of our session. It's an active action that values other people and their complex identities and contexts. It's not a politically correct attempt to say anything goes, but recognizing the value of a person as a complex individual who exists outside of work. It also means considering the needs of and the impact on others when interacting with them and making decisions. We can't truly see things from another person's perspective, but we can try to get as close as possible through genuine listening. And this is where empathy really comes in. Responding and paying attention to their cues gives us information about their interaction needs. And the more we understand about someone's cultural background and styles, the more we can build a culture where they are able to contribute fully. So as we think about the care model and these four really key elements of enshrining and instigating and delivering and implementing and embedding psychological safety in our organizations, I want us to think next about how we can actually do this. So let's have a look at a part 2 of our case study and see what we might come up with in terms of this. So we have Georgi back, and he is in a new job, successfully made that transition. Georgi's new job has shocked him in a different way. From day one, Alana, his new manager, has made it clear that she expects him to challenge her and to speak up if he disagrees. And that was visible in the first team meeting. The atmosphere was really light and at first seemed a bit chaotic. Terry was quite passionate in saying she just couldn't get on board with the new process. Alana didn't agree with her, but listened quietly and thanked her for her contribution. She asked Georgi for his opinion, as he'd not worked with the old process. Hesitantly at first, probably because of his last experience, but gaining in confidence, he agreed with Terry that some parts just didn't make sense. Alana was not completely persuaded, but still promised to meet with Terry and him to get a better understanding of their problems. After the meeting, Alana immediately emailed Georgi and asked him to work with Terry to come up with an alternative for their next meeting. And so for this version, what I'm really keen to hear from you is your thoughts. What level of psychological safety does Georgi have here? And let's get your thoughts on where is he now? He's in his new job. He's in his new job, and I'm going to go back a minute to our levels just in case you need a little reminder. What level of psychological safety? And we've got a combination. We've got contributor and challenger. So here we see a very different experience. So he is most definitely contributing, and in fact, contributing with ideas that are potentially shaking of the status quo, potentially challenging what might have been before, and potentially challenging someone who is actually at a more senior level. Gently at first, and then with more confidence later. And what do we see that's different? What do you think has contributed to him being at this different stage and having had this different experience? So have a look at the case study and type in what is it that would have communicated that to him? What is it that's influenced his behavior in a different way and allowed him to be operating at that level? The leadership style, absolutely. So what do we notice about the leadership style? And in what way do we see? And we see also that he was given permission. So the microculture that the manager has created, inviting him to speak up. So being conscious that depending on Georgi's profile, he may or may not be comfortable speaking up unless invited to speak up. And that's where we start to see some of those differences coming in. He's invited to contribute. So early on in the meeting, he knows that that's expected. He's invited to. And sometimes we might invite people to speak up, but then when they actually contribute, their contribution is not terribly welcome. So what are some other things that happened to reinforce that it's not okay just to it's not only okay to contribute, but it's also okay to challenge, invite and thank. When we acknowledge people's contributions, even if we don't agree with them, and we thank them for those contributions, we're sending a really clear message that we want more of that behavior. And it's highly motivating to people when they are acknowledged for those contributions. The team members' behavior, the team members are also behaving in an inclusive way, invited to engage with genuine contributions, no punishment for a wrong idea, but invitation for cooperation from people who have a different view. So it's really clear that in this particular team, different views are welcomed, encouraged, acknowledged, appreciated. And after the meeting, Alana invited him to convene and come up with an alternative. So we see a completely different approach, both from the leadership as well as from the team members, which hopefully means Georgi will stay in this job for a long time, and experience and a lot of value and be able to give a lot of value. So let's move now. We've looked at what those differences are. We've looked at the different stages and had you think about where your own teams might be in terms of the inclusion ladder. We've looked at the impact of inclusion and in particular looked at this case study. And we've looked at the care model, which looks at those 4 different elements that really help build and reinforce and implement psychological safety and embed it. We're now going to move to a really practical activity in which, again, on Mural, we are going to think about how we implement psychological safety in a really practical way in our own environments. It's essential to business success. A business cannot succeed where we're not getting employees to contribute with their full potential. It's also good for individuals, as we saw earlier. And what I'd like you to do is to think about what can you do to increase psychological safety, and I would like you to contribute these again in Mural. So we get another Mural link in the chat. Please do go ahead. And in particular, I'd like to bring in at this point a special emphasis on including examples to do with hybrid and virtual working. Because I think that context in which we operate adds another dimension to creating psychological safety that we've had to really overcome over the past few years. So as you think about that, please do go ahead and include examples in that. And feel free also to enter any questions into the chat. But let's go ahead and think about what can we personally do? What is in our control, within our gift to actually do to create and contribute to psychologically safe environments. I love that comment there, be authentic and vulnerable. If we are vulnerable and if we are authentic, particularly and especially if we're in positions of leadership, we immediately increase the likelihood of people feeling safe to do the same. Listening, that's a theme that I'm seeing pop up all over the chart. Be a good listener. People feel valued when they are listened to. People feel valued and they are much more likely to contribute when we are listening. Empathize. Step into other people's shoes. Consider how things might be perceived from their perspective, especially if it's one that might be very different from your own perspective. Communicate with the team regularly. So communication has a major impact. And within that, listening, asking questions, being curious, and doing that in a consistent and regular way. Be open to others' input. And a great comment in the chat, act on diminishing culture of fear. Act on this, take action, and increase communication channels. So particularly in a hybrid and virtual worlds, relying consistently on only one channel can definitely impact psychological safety, especially because we will have preferences and there will be differences of comfort levels with different channels. So making sure that your communication channels are diverse to accommodate different members. Also, think about examples that you could include in order to reach out to people who are very different from yourself in terms of preferences. So, how can we include others that might have a very different way of working or very different preferences from ourselves? Explain your values. I love that because so often we assume that our values are consistent with the values of others and our behaviors line up with our values. And so we act according to our values. What may not be as obvious is what's driving those behaviors. And if we're able to be transparent about our values, in other words, what's important to us, we can give a lot of insight into others as to why we might have a particular view or behave in a particular way. The flip side of that, I think, with regards values, is being really curious about other people's values. What's important to them? What's driving some of their behaviors and views and opinions? Know how your team prefers to communicate really reinforces that knowledge is power, that the more we understand about those preferences, the easier it is to understand people's views, what's on people's minds, what's important to them, their behaviors, their actions, and so on. And I love that. Ask for the others why. Ask the question why. Why is that important to you? Why is that view important? The more curious we are, the more we get to learn and the more we understand where someone's coming from. And I think a fundamental difference is that difference between being critical and being curious. Oftentimes, when we might find ourselves in a critical or judgmental mode, it's good to remind ourselves that we might very well be on the psychological danger side of the spectrum because we tend to blame and point fingers and go into judgment and critical mode when we're not personally feeling safe. So it's a great warning to us when we move into that judgment zone. And the answer to that is to become super curious about why we might be reacting in that way, but also why the person that we are interacting with and working with and communicating with might have that particular view. Recognition. When we recognize and value others for their contribution, for the difference that they bring, for the challenge that they provide, we're only going to encourage more from them around those behaviors, which again increases inclusion and trust. Notice that they're different projects with different team members. And a great practical suggestion, have two facilitators. So particularly in a group setting, one to monitor the room and one to monitor Zoom. So great hybrid example is notice that people's responses may or may not be visible when you're working in a virtual context. So prepare for both. Introduce well-being programs. And be curious and ask questions. Something that can really help understand where people are coming from in a virtual context is to ask for feedback and ask questions. You'll notice in this webinar, a number of times we've asked you for your input. We're curious, we want to know where you're coming from. And in a format like this, it's a highly effective way to be able to do that. And to get input from all of you and your really valuable comments. Demonstrate and show trust of your team members. What are some of the ways that we can demonstrate trust? Because I love that comment, show trust on your team members. How can we demonstrate that we trust others? What can we do to reinforce that people are trusted? Feel free to enter in the chat or in in the little post-it notes. Delegation, great. When we delegate, we give permission, we increase trust, and also we tell them, and we don't micromanage. Absolutely. We empower them. We thank colleagues for contradicting us. We're open to, we seek their advice. I trust you, you can do it. Absolutely. So some fantastic suggestions. And as you look at these, there will be ones on here that you are absolutely doing. And then there'll be ones that you think, maybe there is an opportunity for me to do that. I see another really great one related to hybrid and virtual working, ice breaking and transparency. I think making time upfront, right at the start of a virtual meeting interaction session, investing time in connecting allows you to really replace the connecting that happens in a physical environment. If you think about that opening ritual that we do without even realizing in a meeting where everyone's settling in and getting their coffee at the coffee machine, finding a way to replicate that virtually creates that connection, that empathy, inviting people to contribute, sharing that moment can increase the trust and connection throughout a virtual session, and be present with good eye contact. And again, that's really relevant virtually as well. I think often we are looking at a screen instead of actually making eye contact with the camera, and learning how to do that can really increase the psychological safety, the trust, that feeling of connection, because virtually it can feel very disconnected. I love these practical examples, and hopefully every single one of you has something to learn here. And another really great one I see, guide and correct privately and with compassion. So, creating psychological safety does not mean that we shy away from difficult conversations. It does not mean that we highlight harmony at all costs. It does not mean that we never disagree. It's a particular way in which we do all of those things, that we disagree with trust and compassion and openness and vulnerability, and that we have challenging, difficult conversations with empathy, and that we actually build on that, so that these interactions are able to create that culture in which we can openly challenge and get the best value from every single one of our contributions. So, as we leave those great suggestions and move towards reminding ourselves of what we've covered in this session, I'd like you to take a moment to think about your own situations, your own experiences, your own level of psychological safety, your own managers, your own role, potentially as a manager, and what you have taken from this session, and an action that you can take as a result of this. So, some of the really key things that we've heard and that we can continue to do is listen more. Be truly present when we're listening, not be listening in order to set up our next point, in order to transmit our wants and thoughts and needs, but to truly connect with and understand where someone else is coming from. To stand up when we see people doing things that erode psychological safety, when we hear negative communication or feedback about others, being willing to confront that, being willing to call people out, walk away when people are being undermined or situations are being undermined, to give that feedback and be open and honest and transparent about the impact that that can have, to really get curious and take time to learn about other people's cultural styles, and when in doubt, ask. So often we're intimidated when we are unsure about how someone might react is to move beyond that intimidation into curiosity, to be willing to be vulnerable and ask what people's preferences are. When in doubt, ask. And the more we know about other people's backgrounds, the more we're able to be the ones to adapt our behavior, to be the ones to really think about what we might need to change in ourselves in order to allow others to feel included. And and being knowledgeable about that and curious is the most effective way to be able to do that. So what I'd like you to do now is, as I do a really quick recap on what we've covered, I'd like you to think about what your top takeaway has been from this session and share that in the chat. Is what has been most useful and how will you use that, or what difference will it make? So, what's been most useful and what impact will that have? So, that could be a commitment that you're going to make, an action that you're going to take, something that you're going to do more of or less of in order to really contribute to creating a psychologically safe environment. And we started out by looking at the differences between feeling psychologically safe and psychological danger. We looked at the importance of that in terms of people being able to bring their best and be of their best. And we looked at the evidence for psychological safety. How do we know when it's present? And we then moved on to look at the 4 stages and really think about where our team is at. If we want to maximize our performance and our potential, we really are only able to leverage that when we are at that challenger level where people feel so psychologically safe that they can challenge the status quo and come with their diverse opinions and ideas and do that in a place of safety. We looked at the concept that we can backslide down that ladder and that maintaining that level of psychological safety is a constant process. It's not something that you achieve and tick off the box and then you're done. It constantly needs to be reinforced. And if we do slip down that and we have a setback and something goes wrong, is that we work to reestablish that and that we look at some of those great examples of what you just shared on the mural board about how we actually do that, that we're vulnerable, we show up, and we rectify things. We looked at the case study and the impact in an everyday world environment. We looked at the care model and the role of communication and authenticity and respect and empathy and practical ways that we can do that. And especially considering this virtual environment where so much of our communication happens in a remote situation. And let's have a look at what your key takeaways are. We've got some great ones here. Be a quiet listener so that team members feel they're important and connected. Appreciate when someone's done a good job. Catch people doing things right, not just focused on doing things wrong. Give appreciative feedback, transparent feedback, one to one calls can be really, really helpful. Um, Always remind groups of their achievements. Be honest about what needs to improve. The wheels of psychological danger and safety, and really looking at those comparisons. If people in your team are pointing fingers a lot of the time and blaming, they are not feeling psychologically safe. And think about what's causing that, what's making them not feel safe. Um, yeah, it's so easy, Christina. You're right. It's incredibly easy to ruin psychological safety. The good news is that we can reestablish it. We just need to really be aware and look for the symptoms of people not speaking up and not feeling safe. Um, don't ignore the trash talk. I love that, Yemi. I think that's a really great one. Be bold. It takes courage to call people out, but people soon start learning that they can't trash talk around you, that you're not someone who will tolerate that. Um, and you'll really be contributing to that environment. Um, Enjoying the business case, balance or monitor where your colleagues are on the respect and permission. Do people feel respected? Do people feel that they have permission? If in doubt, ask people, how much permission do you feel you have? How free are you to act? How much do you think your opinions count? When in doubt, ask and be curious. Psychological safety is very much influenced by culture. We have very different evidence that we need to see in order to feel safe. And the more we know about that, the more we're able to help those who are really different from us feel safe in our presence. And the more we communicate about what we need as well, so that we can feel safe in their presence. And we need to bring everyone in the journey. Is a really great one, Natalie. Everyone in the journey, whether it's upwards and our peers, as well as those that we manage, um, and um, and really be transparent when we notice things are negative or bringing things down. So I'd really like to thank you so much for your amazing contributions and energy and inputs. We've had so many fantastic comments and thoughts shared, and I really hope that this has added value in your journey to creating psychological safety wherever you are, and also to contributing to the culture of psychological safety in your organizations. Remember, knowledge is power, and would really like to encourage you to reach out and to watch the video in the apply section of your country navigator. You have a learning path that you can follow, and keep educating yourself, because the more you know, the more flexible you are able to be in your own behaviors. And I wish you all the best as you go out back into the world. Be psychologically safe, create that safety, and thank you so much from all of us. Take care and goodbye.